Interviews can be tough and honestly quite exhausting, but they're just something that we all have to do at some point. Now, over the years, I think I've gotten a bit better at them, and I wanted to share my approach as a designer at each stage of the process. So this video is going to be split into 5 parts, each focusing on a different stage of the process. So first off, we're going to talk about recruiter calls, which is typically the first stage. Then we're going to go over hiring manager interviews and how to prepare for them, as well as portfolio presentations. Then we're going to talk about the design challenge. We're going to focus on whiteboard challenges and take-home design challenges. And lastly, we're going to discuss culture fits. Let's talk about recruiter calls. So this is usually the first step in the interview process. So you have to approach this in a very tactical way because a lot of the time, recruiters do not have direct design experience. So you need to ensure you're communicating your skills in a very relatable way. I think recruiter calls really lean into your softer skills, so charm will get you very far at this point. Anyway, here's how I try to get ready for this stage. So my first step is usually researching the company. And the goal at this stage is to communicate to the recruiter that you're a perfect fit for this job. So the first step is really understanding what the company does, the main products, what they're selling, what industry they're in, whether it's B2B, B2C, and whether it's in, for example, education or fintech, whatever sector that it operates mostly in. I really recommend going beyond just like reading their website and also maybe watching their YouTube channel if available, as well as any founder interviews or team interviews. This will really help you get a better understanding of the vision behind what they're building or what they've already built. Second thing I try to do is to study the job description in depth. And it's so important to research the company and also to understand what they're looking for in a potential candidate. Now, one thing I've noticed is that most job roles will have like the essential requirements, and then they'll also have like preferred qualifications, right? So it's really helpful to try to understand which essential requirements you meet, and then also if you have any preferred qualifications. So I try to note my skills and match the requirements and emphasize them when communicating with the recruiter. Please do not forget that sometimes you're not going to meet all of the requirements, be they the preferred or the essential, and I am fully in favor of shooting your shot anyway and just applying, because what's the worst that could happen? The next thing I do is I always try to document what I've learned so far. So based on the information that I've gathered from like the previous steps that we went over, I try to write a doc or, put it in a book. You can also follow this step either by writing or documenting as you prefer. So I note the specific things that I want to also make sure that I say to the recruiter based off of the research that I've done. So this usually includes the parts of my experience and skills that match either the job description or something about the company. So for example, if I've had experience in working in fintech with some specific things, if I know that the company is also working in that direction, I will try to draw some parallels between that and surface that to the recruiter. I also try to note other things that I think could positively impact the recruiter's view of me, so including passion projects, hobbies, personal interests, and things like that. But just to clarify, this is not a script. So the goal is not to remember every detail and say it in a specific way. It's just to have specific talking points that you can remember to cover during the interview. The last thing I try to do to prepare for this stage, which is optional, is to practice small talk. So if you're a bit more introverted, I really do recommend doing some practice for some small talk, some light jokes, simple things, light conversation starters that can kind of lighten the mood, show a good positive attitude and just create a good vibe overall. Like I said, it's really important to connect with people as individuals because that can create a really good impression of you. The next stage is the hiring manager interview, and this is where things can get a little bit more intense at this point, so it's easy to get a bit overwhelmed, but it's okay. We've got this. So these are the things that I try to do to prepare for the hiring manager interview. So the first thing is really practicing potential questions and answers. So at this stage, you're most likely speaking with someone who is very familiar with the industry. They could even be a designer themselves. So we want to be prepared to answer both like the technical questions and the non-technical questions. The first question will usually be some variation of tell me about yourself, which is a very tricky question and can put you on the spot. So we want to make sure that we've practiced a concise answer for this question that covers very important things like your background, your experience, the impact that you've had in your career so far, as well as interests, relevant interests. One quick tip for practicing like questions and answers is to put in the company, job title, and description into a tool like say ChatGPT or your preferred AI tool and ask it to generate potential hiring manager questions that you can use to practice with. Another really important tip is to practice answering these questions using the STAR approach, which is essentially your situation, task, actions, and results. This will help you to tell people, what they want to know while still being concise and not going off point. Next thing we want to do to prepare, or I try to do to prepare at this stage, is to really study what I've put in my resume. So we want to study it, read it like a book, because it's very likely that you're going to be asked a lot of questions based off of what you've put in your resume. So we want to be familiar with the work. So I try to be familiar with the work that I've done over the years, and of course the impact that I've made or had in each listed role. So the hiring manager is most likely going to focus on your most recent experience and any experience that has maybe some similarities with the role that they are currently recruiting for. As I mentioned in the previous tip, this is a great opportunity for you to deliberately highlight any key experience that you have that matches what you believe from your research that the hiring manager is looking for. The next thing I try to do at this stage is researching the existing design team, just doing a little snooping around, just for information and just to gather some data, let's call it that. So this helps me to kind of have an idea of maybe what the design team structure is like. So it helps me to ask questions about the team. And I also try to see if there's any pattern with like the experience of people that they've hired over the years. I also want to see the average tenure, if possible. If people leave the company after a few months, there's a chance that could be a potential red flag. So you just want to keep it in mind. Remember, interviews go both ways. So we want to know like what they're like while we're also letting them know what we are like. At this stage, I also try to familiarize myself with my strengths and my weaknesses. Because this usually comes up during this interview. So yeah, quick tip, please do not say anything or any weakness that could potentially put you in a bad light. Next thing I try to do is to prepare the questions that I know that I want to ask. Remember what we said about like it's a two-way street, trying to understand more about the team, how they work, and all of that. And also asking questions helps to show that you're putting some level of thought into this. It's a good indicator of like your interest, your enthusiasm, and all of that. So I try to prepare questions like, what does your ideal candidate look like? What would you expect this person, the person that you hire, to have achieved, let's say in the first month or the first 90 days? What does success look like in this role? What does career progression look like? How has your experience been working in this company? What is the current design team structure like? How does design partner with business to solve problems and stuff like that? So these kind of help you understand the team that you're going to be a part of, helps you understand the people that you're going to be working with, and also helps you understand like the person you're talking to specifically, what is their own opinion of where they're working at right now. Look out for any potential red flags, look out for anything that stands out to you, and also look out for things that excite you. If they say something that's like, yeah, I want that. That's also a cool thing to note. Typically, the next stage after the hiring manager interview is the portfolio presentation. Also a lot of pressure, but like I said, don't worry, we've got this. Now, for some companies, this is the only technical stage, while other companies insist that you might have to do like another technical stage. So I have a video about how I present like case studies from my portfolio during interviews. So please feel free to check that out for like a more in-depth video on how you can present your case study or portfolio to hiring managers. So now let's get into how to actually prepare for a portfolio presentation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to pick the projects. Typically, when you get an email telling you like, oh, you've gotten to the next stage is a portfolio presentation, it comes with instructions. Sometimes they'll tell you prepare one project, sometimes they'll tell you two, and then they will also give you an idea of like how long the interview is going to take so you can prepare accordingly. So you want to pick 1 to 2 projects that closely match what you think the team is looking for. So for example, if you're being hired to work at Spotify's mobile design system team or something like that, you want to prepare a project that probably is design system related or is a mobile based kind of project, right? So things that closely match what you think they're looking for. If you don't have that, because it sometimes happens that you don't have a project that necessarily matches for what you think they're specifically looking for, it's also okay to present projects that you're just really proud of. So projects that are, good work altogether and would impress them and show your skills as a designer. It's also important to ensure that these projects that you're presenting are detailed and have measurable impacts that you can include. So don't forget to include, how you collaborated with other teammates, and stakeholders, but also fully own what exactly you did and what you were responsible for. Next thing I try to do is to articulate the storyline. So remember that portfolio presentations, case studies, whatever word we want to use to call them, they're all stories, right? So I try my best to tell a story. So we want to ensure that we're explaining the problem, making it relatable, easy to understand, and then we're going over the steps that we have taken to solve the problem and of course the impacts that the solution had. I also try to include, let's say, hurdles, constraints, disappointments, and how we figured them out. People like to hear the parts where things didn't exactly go as planned and what you learned from the experience overall. I also try to strike just the right amount of balance between the right amount of detail without going overboard and also not skipping too much detail so it's not too scanty or lacking any detail. I also try to be very mindful of time. So like I mentioned, typically they'll send you an email with an outline of what's expected, the duration. So I strongly suggest practicing your portfolio presentation within that time frame and also allowing room for them to ask questions within that time frame. Next thing we want to do is we want to pick a tool. So typically for me, the whole process of writing the case study or the presentation and choosing all of that will happen in Google Docs before I start kind of going into more detail with visuals and the look and the feel of the presentation. So at the point of picking a tool, I have most of the content ready that I know that I want to work with. So I personally would recommend Figma, Canva, or Pitch for designing your portfolio presentation, but ultimately whichever one you want to use is up to you. So you want to use a tool that you're familiar with that has good design functionality, presentation settings, and can support some very simple animations or transitions for a really nice touch. So the next thing for preparing for the portfolio presentation is to start to figure out your visual design system, right? So how do you want to communicate or how do you want to present your work to these people via your presentation? So I would always advise having 1 to 2 fonts and a color palette that really matches your style. I try to have colors that I believe match my personal brand, and I also try to limit how I present information in the presentation. So I'm trying to go step by step and really avoid information overload at any point. I also avoid using too many animations or transitions and all of those things. As designers, we can go a little bit overboard. I try to not do that so it doesn't get distracting. So now let's talk about design challenges. So specifically starting from whiteboard challenges. To be honest, personally, I dislike whiteboard challenges. They stress me out, makes me super anxious. However, we need to do what we need to do. So let's talk about how to prepare for whiteboard challenges. So the first thing I try to do is I watch videos. I always watch videos to see how people solve whiteboard challenges. So not only am I watching the videos, I'm taking notes on the questions the interviewee is asking the interviewer. With whiteboard challenges, the quality of questions you ask is so important because the interviewers really want to see the depth of your thought process and what you consider when solving problems. Now, the world has changed. everything is AI related at this point. So I also try to include that in my process now. So I typically would advise people who are currently interviewing to practice with AI. So ask it to generate whiteboard challenges, prompts, and practice with them as often as possible. So if you have friends maybe in your community who are other designers or maybe also work in tech or product, you could ask them to support you by acting as an interviewer using some of these like generated prompts and see how that goes and see how your performance and confidence is. The next thing I try to do when preparing for whiteboard challenges is practicing thinking out loud while working. One thing I struggle with is explaining my thought process like while I'm actually working. It can be a lot. So it's a lot easier for me to just like design and then ask questions when needed. However, this is like not something that interviewers want to see. So I try to practice like solving the challenge while communicating what I'm thinking, asking questions and letting them know how their answers to my questions is actually influencing my design decisions. Now let's talk about take-home design challenges. I have a whole video about like how I solved the design challenge that landed me a job a couple of years ago. So please watch it for more information and more details. Because in this step, I'm not going to go into so much detail because there's not so much preparation to do. You just have to do the challenge. But yeah, when you do get to that stage, I think the first thing is really about studying the challenge. They're very open-ended questions. So I always try to like just spend some time just sitting with it, trying to like dissect it, think about it from all possible angles. And the next thing at this stage when preparing for this is like asking any questions after getting the challenge. I think sometimes you can be sent an unclear design challenge. That's happened to me so many times. And in such cases, I have always tried to reach out to ask like clarifying questions, like what exactly are the expectations for the results of this challenge? For example, like should it be a prototype? Should it be a presentation, a document? A good company will do their best to set you up for success by answering your questions and ensuring everything is smooth. If a company doesn't want to properly explain what they expect from you, again, that could be another red flag and they might not be the team that you would really enjoy working with. And yeah, the next thing is really solving the challenge. So I have a video about how you can solve design challenges, what you need to include. So please watch that for more information on how you can effectively solve design challenges. So if you've gotten to the culture fit stage, congratulations. Usually this stage is very crucial, but it's one of the last stages and it's so close. At this point, the job is like almost yours. So this doesn't include, for example, offer negotiation and all of that. That is the real final stage, but I wasn't focusing on like that stage for this interview because that's more about like how you want to negotiate benefits, salary and stuff like that. So that's a separate conversation. I can maybe do a video about that if you would want. So for the culture fit stage, it's usually a bit more of like a relaxed atmosphere. The people that you're talking to have an understanding of what you're capable of, your experience and stuff like that. So the environment is usually a bit less relaxed from a technical perspective. So at this stage, you're usually with like multiple potential teammates trying to understand what working with you could potentially be like. Again, this is where you would want to turn your natural like charm and personality up a little bit, really lean into like your soft skills, your personality, while of course, please, keeping it professional, right? So you want to give everyone a solid understanding of your technical ability and your personality. So let's talk a bit about how we want to prepare for this stage. So first thing we want to do is we want to reflect on the previous interview stages. So we want to recall any specific feedback that you received that they seem maybe particularly interested in, for example, your collaboration style or a project that you mentioned. So if something has come up before, just be ready for the chance that it might come up again, and be ready to like expand on some of those points. Now you can reference previous conversations, that could show that you're paying attention and, value their input. So for example, in your previous conversation with a particular interviewer, we discussed how the team values so-and-so, and, I'd like to elaborate on how I align with that particular thing. The next thing is to kind of spend some time refreshing your memory on the company's values, goals, and all of that, and their mission, and think of ways that you can connect, their mission with your work and maybe things that you've done in the past or things that you're passionate about. Next is we want to always prepare for behavioral questions. Common questions like, can you give me an example of when you took initiative on a project? It's different questions coming from different people, so most likely will be very behavior focused. Tell me about a time when you worked on a challenging project with a team, or tell me about a project that you're proud of or a project you're not proud of, those kind of things. Again, remember to use the STAR approach to keep your answers super concise. Next thing we want to do is we want to prepare our own questions. Have questions that you can ask the team. Me personally, I like to ask what's something you enjoy most about working here? How does collaboration work within the team? And other such questions. I also try to ask what are some of the team's current struggles, challenges, and how does everyone here expect the person to kind of work with everything and maybe resolve or help them navigate some of the challenges that they're currently facing. Lastly, we want to be authentic, share your enthusiasm and interest in the role. Of course, not doing too much, but just doing just enough so that we're showing interest, excitement, when discussing projects that you're passionate about. Don't shy away from, showing your excitement, things that you're really keen about. And also if you're really looking forward to working with the team. I think for me, that's something I always try to do. And I think people appreciate that. So let your personality, shine through while of course remaining professional. So if you have a sense of humor and that's just naturally a part of who you are, I would say don't hesitate to, to use that, to lean into that, of course, in an appropriate way. If you're preparing for a design interview, I wish you all the very, 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 very best. If this video was helpful for you, please do not forget to support me by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. My name is Sharon Onyinye. Thank you so much for watching.